Hear now, child of the stars, and let the weight of silence rest upon you as I speak of the Mandalorians. This is the way. They are not bound by a single world, nor by bloodline, nor by the shape of flesh. They are a people of choice, of oath, of unyielding will. To be Mandalorian is not to be born, it is to be forged. Forged in fire, forged in war, forged in Beskar, the iron skin. Metal torn from the bones of Mandalore's soil, resistant to blasters, impervious even to the searing kiss of a Jedi's lightsaber. It is more than armor, it is inheritance, it is family. Each plate carried down through generations, dented, scarred, painted in the hues of vengeance, justice, or memory. To don the Beskar is to clothe oneself in history. The Jedi respected them, for though the Mandalorians, save one, bore not the Force, they bore discipline, cunning, and weapons designed to humble even the greatest of sorcerers. Jetpacks to defy gravity, blasters that struck with precision, whipcords and flamethrowers to ensnare and consume. They learned to fight not one Jedi, but many, adapting, studying, refusing to bow to mystical power. And so the galaxy remembers them as warriors, mercenaries, conquerors, survivors. Yet beneath the blood and the battles lies the heartbeat of their creed. The Rezolnare, 6 sacred actions binding them to one another. To wear the armor, to speak their tongue, to raise their children in the ways of Mandalore, to defend their clan, to contribute to its welfare, and to rally when the Mandalore calls. This is the soul of Mandalorian life. Iron in hand, fire in heart, and loyalty that endures, even when worlds fall to ash. And so as you close your eyes and drift into the long night, hear the tale of these people who would not kneel. From the ancient Tong who first raised the banner, through civil war, through betrayal, through fire and exile, until the final sparks of rebirth. This is the story of Mandalore. This is the way. Chapter 1, The First Fires. Close your eyes, my young one, and picture a galaxy still raw, still untamed. Long before the names you know, before Jedi and Sith warred across the stars, before empires rose and crumbled, there lived a people who were not bound to a single world. They were the Tong, born in the shadows of ancient Coruscant. They were a race cast aside, driven from their birthplace by the relentless wars of humanity. Tall, powerful, and dark as obsidian, their visages struck fear into all who beheld them. Yet exile did not break them. No, it tempered them. They became nomads, learning to wander the stars, binding themselves not to soil but to one another. In their language, they named themselves Mandalorians, after their war god Mandalore I. For to the Tong, war was no mere act of survival. It was worship, it was transformation. They spoke of Kadharangia, the destroyer god, who promised that through conflict all stagnation would burn away. To fight was to live, to conquer was to change, to kneel was to die. They made ritual of battle, my young one, carving the canons of honor into their way of life. Mercy was weakness. Cunning was strength, and loyalty to the clan was the highest law. It was in this age that the Tong first set their eyes upon a fertile world in the Outer Rim. A planet of forests and seas rich with game and soil. There they waged war against the indigenous mythosaurs, colossal beasts, towering like mountains whose footsteps shook the earth. The battles raged for generations, each Tong measuring their worth against the monster's fangs and thunderous charges. But the Mandalorians did not falter. Piece by piece, they brought the mythosaurs low, until the last of the giants fell, and the world was theirs. They named it Mandalore, after their god, and it became the heart of their legend. The skull of the mythosaur itself was carved into their banners, a symbol of triumph, of ferocity, of dominion. The warriors adorned themselves in armor of iron, but this was no ordinary metal. It was Beskar, the iron of Mandalore, stronger than durasteel, able to withstand blaster fire, even to turn aside the burning blade of a Jedi. Each plate was hammered by hand, fitted to body and soul. Armor was no mere protection, it was identity, passed down through bloodlines, reforged when shattered, painted in colors of mourning, vengeance, or victory. In armor, the Mandalorian ceased to be one and became many. They became eternal. Yet, remember this, child of the stars. The Mandalorians were never one people alone. As their wars spread across neighboring worlds, they conquered, but they also welcomed. Zabraks, Twi'leks, Trandoshans, and even humans who proved themselves in battle were adopted into the fold. For the Mandalorians, birth mattered little. Deeds were all. To fight bravely was to earn a place at the fire. To falter was to be cast out as Darmandar, soulless, without place in the great afterlife of the Mandalorians. Thus from the Tong came a creed larger than any single race. A creed of adoption, of loyalty, of eternal struggle. It was in this crucible that the Rezol Nare, the 6 actions, were forged. To wear armor, to speak the language of Mandoa, to raise one's children as warriors, to defend clan and family, to contribute to the strength of the community, and to rally when the Mandalore called. These 6 actions bound a warrior not merely to themselves, but to all Mandalorians across the stars. But what is a creed without an enemy? For the Mandalorians found one, the Jedi. The tales of those first encounters are etched into Mandalorian memory like scars into Beskar. The Jedi were unlike any foe the warriors had faced. Their lightsabers cut through steel as though it were cloth. Their minds bent the world itself, hurling warriors aside with unseen force, leaping and striking with inhuman grace. Many Mandalorians fell in those first clashes, their weapons shattered, their strategies broken. And yet, the Mandalorians did not bow. No, they adapted. Each defeat became a lesson, each loss a forge. They crafted countermeasures, whistling birds that swarmed even the swiftest Jedi, flame that consumed robes, whipcords that bound wrists faster than a saber could cut free. Jetpacks carried them to heights the Jedi could not anticipate. For every trick of the Force, the Mandalorians devised an answer, and so their reputation grew. Not simply as mercenaries, not merely as conquerors, but as Jedi killers. The only mortals who could look into the eyes of a Jedi Knight and not flinch. It is said, my young one, that when the Jedi Council spoke of war, they always whispered the same warning. Beware the Mandalorians. Yet even in this glory, shadows stirred, for strength breeds pride, and pride breeds division. Across the centuries, the Mandalorians would splinter again and again, as leaders rose and fell, as some sought conquest, while others sought survival. And with each fracture, blood was spilled, not only against outsiders, but against kin. Still, through every civil war, through exile, through defeat, one truth endured. They remained, always. So, child of the stars, let this vision settle into your mind. A people clad in Beskar, banners raised beneath the mythosaur skull, eyes burning with the fire of Kad Harangir, daring even the Jedi to stand in their path. This is who they were at the dawn. This is the ember that never dies. And it is from this ember that the story of Mandalore begins. Chapter 2, Wars of Conquest. The ember becomes a flame, my young one. See it brightening along the edges of the outer rim, licking at the dark, until the night itself seems to lean closer for warmth. The Tong are no longer only wanderers. They have taken the skull of the mythosaur for their banner, and the iron of their world for their skin, and now they look outward with patient hunger. For the Mandalorians have learned that a people without a horizon grows tired, and they refuse to tire. They will test themselves against the galaxy, and in that testing become the thing they worship, change wrought by struggle. Thus begins the Age of Crusade. First came Mandalore the Indomitable, a name spoken like a drumbeat. He gathered the clans with the old rites, dusted the long helms, and woke sleeping forges with sparks that smelted night into armor. Upon basilisk war droids, those thundering winged monstrosities of iron, his riders fell like a storm upon the deep core. At Quar, beneath sky scarred by ancient magma, they carved corridors of fire through Republic garrisons, and at Harkul, on a plain painted with dust, the Mandalore himself faced the fallen Jedi Ulic Keldroma, who had traded temple silence for the roaring council of war. Blade met blade, jetpack thunder met the cool economy of a force-born steppe. In the end, the Indomitable yielded, not in spirit, but by right. Thus was an oath sworn, and an old enmity momentarily sheathed. You must see it, child, a wedge of iron sliding into the fractures of the Republic's peace. Under the shadow of Exar Kun, fleets struck Forost with surgical brutality, stealing a harvest of ships still warm from the yards. Basilisks shrieked through Galactic City, talons on Ferrocrete, a vision to haunt senators' sleep. Yet fortune breaks men as often as it bears them. Betrayal unfurled like a black flag. Alliances are knives with two edges. And soon the Mandalore's gambit at Onderon drew him into the green jaws of Duxon's jungles. There the beasts did what armies could not. They tore down the Indomitable, and the mask, the soul of rule, vanished into the leaves. A warrior fell, a tradition endured. From the canopy's gloom stepped another bearer. One warrior found the mask and became Mandalore, as is the way of Iron Crowns. And after him rose the figure history would learn to fear. Mandalore the Ultimate. He was not a keeper of embers. He was a bellows. Where the Tong blood had thinned across centuries, he summoned new veins to the heart. Zabrak and human, Rhodian and Togorian, Any who could stand the heat were welcome to the anvil. In this he was very Mandalorian, a culture of oath over origin, merit over memory. Under his hand the creed widened and the Neo-Crusader ranks gleamed in uniform plates, a cold blue tide that made governors watch their horizons with clenched teeth. They learned the cadence of relentless advance. Outposts fell like fruit, Vanquo, Taris, way stations strewn like stars across a map of slow strangulation. Supply turned into a weapon. Border worlds became stepping stones. Then there was Cathar, the sea dark with the gathered and the condemned, and Cassus Fett ordering what even warriors whisper about only in low rooms, the scourging that left a species as a memory. The Mandalorians told themselves that vengeance has its own arithmetic, that old debts must be paid lest the ledger of honor become a joke. But culture is a mirror, young one, and when it reflects the faces of the dying too long, even the proud must look away. The Republic hesitated, war-weary and politically overcautious, and so the Mandalorians tested deeper. At Sirocco, they looked upon fortresses stitched through a living city and judged the choice without honor. The answer fell from orbit in pale fire. 27 cities became scars. On Jebel, the horror wore a different mask, as talisman-born plague twisted men into beasts. And again, the sky answered with nuclear punctuation. There were negotiations too, bargains offered by ambitious lords who would sell the hunger of Exogorths as a weapon, though such monstrous employs were fortunately denied by mischance and moral queasiness. All the while the drums grew. The Neo-Crusaders did not measure the war by territories alone, but by what it demanded from their creed: endurance, obedience, victory. Yet in righteousness and restraint the Jedi sat divided. Some argued that patience was wisdom. Others felt patience had curdled into cowardice. Then came the vision on Cathar's shore, armor half buried in silt, the water remembering, the Force itself speaking of slaughter. The revanchists rose from that tide, led by a young keen-edge named Revan, with Malak at his side. If the Mandalorians were a blade, the Jedi now forged a whetstone to meet it. Strategy learned from study of the foe, ruthlessness learned from necessity. Revan drew maps that were also traps, sang to fleets as a conductor sings to a choir, timing feints, sacrifices by design. The tide stuttered, then turned. There is a music to reversal. You hear it when Beskar plates, once marching forward, must turn and defend. When worlds like Taris that had learned to fear blue armor see it retreat. When heroes who never imagined a step backward learn the choreography of withdrawal. The Mandalorians were no strangers to adaptation, but here they met themselves, reflected in a commander who studied them without hatred, and used their virtues against them. Even the brilliant strike at Jagga's cluster could not balance the ledger for long. The clans were being shepherded toward a final reckoning, and the shepherd smiled beneath a mask he had not yet fully admitted was his own. Then, Malachor 5. Imagine, if you will, a world that does not merely hold darkness, but exudes it like heat from volcanic rock. The air a bruise, the wind a chorus of long screams turned into weather. Revan chose it as one chooses a final board on which to place every piece. The Mandalorian fleet assembled, the Republic hung like bait in black water. The duel we expect, The Mandalore against the master of this new doctrine was granted, and Mandalore the ultimate fell beneath a blade, guided by a will sharpened to a needle's point. But even that was not the end. Into the deep tenor of battle sounded a single monstrous note, the mass shadow generator. Gravity itself bent low and tore ships to glittering shrapnel, men and women to ash and resolved to silence. When the horror stilled, nothing was as it had been. Revan the victor stepped from the smoke, bearing the Mandalore's mask like a theological answer. The clans, stunned, unclasped weapons and sent surrender spiraling through the void. The terms were not merely political. Armor was taken, stockpiles destroyed, war mounts smashed. The mask vanished into the privacy of a stranger's keeping. A people whose memory lived in passed-down plates found those plates carrion in foreign hands, and a silence entered the forges like a winter no one had prepared for. Now do not think the Mandalorians learned nothing in defeat. In the chill that follows a burned forest, seeds wait. The diaspora scattered to mercenary work, to quiet farms, to small violences on poorer worlds. Some became pirates and shame, others gladiators and spectacle. A few kept faith in shabby armor, whispering to themselves that the Resolnare was not merely about conquest, but survival with dignity. And somewhere, hands not their own held the mask that makes a Mandalore, keeping the crown of iron from any head that might claim it too soon. Breathe with me, child, and feel the lesson cooling upon the anvil. There is honor in victory, yes. There is also instruction in loss. The wars of conquest had proven the Mandalorians' capacity to meet sorcery with strategy, to harden themselves against the luminous authority of the Jedi, and to bend countless species into a single culture of oath. They had also proven with a bitter thoroughness that a creed can be pushed past the point where honor still recognizes itself in the mirror. The sea remembers Cathar. Cities remember Seroka. Somewhere in the hush between stars, even steel shivers at certain memories, and yet you know it already. Ideas do not die. Not if the language survives on tongues stained with campfire smoke and Netragal. Not if helmets pass, dented and beloved, from a dying hand to one that trembles but closes nonetheless. Across the dark, small lights gathered clans, fragments, heirloom codes, and the galaxy, complacent again, forgot how swiftly iron can remember its shape when the hammer returns. Sleep a little within this truth. The Mandalorians met the Jedi and did not break. They met Revan and did not vanish. They met defeat and did not cease. The flame that began as an ember has become a coal, red and enduring, tucked beneath ash where careless boots will miss it. But the careful hand, the Mandalorian hand, knows exactly where to dig and how to breathe it back to life. Thus end the wars of conquest. Thus begin the dark wanderings that follow. What was shattered will seek a center. What was scattered will listen for a voice. And one day, a name you have already heard will pick up a mask from another's keeping, bind the clans, and teach the galaxy that iron sleeps but never dreams. Now rest, young one. The next turning awaits us in the quiet, when a mercenary with the patience of stone will be asked to become Mandalore the Preserver. Chapter 3, The Preserver. The embers glow still, child, though the fire has fallen silent. The wars of conquest are over, The mask of the ultimate is gone, and Mandalorian iron lies scattered across the galaxy like shrapnel from a broken star. The clans drift. Some clutch to scraps of honor. Others drown in dishonor's ale. Many sell their strength for coin, becoming mercenaries who know the weight of their own worth but not the meaning of it. And yet, the Beskar remembers. It is in this scattered twilight that another name rises, not born to the title, not draped in glory from the first breath, but patient, watchful, a man of stone will, unbending resolve, and the memory of what his people once were. He is called Candorus Ordo. History in time will rename him something greater. Mandalore the Preserver. Candorus begins as many warriors of his age, a mercenary. The Republic lies wounded from the Mandalorian wars, and the Jedi civil war tears deeper still. Soldiers are wanted everywhere, and credits are easy to find if one is willing to fight. Candorus fights, yes, but more than that, he watches. He listens to stories, measures foes, weighs honor against the hollow ring of coin, and he remembers. It is alongside Revan, the very Jedi who broke the clans at Malachor, that Candorus finds his strange purpose. Once he might have spat at the thought, a Mandalorian following a Jedi, even one who now bears the mask of Sith. But Revan is more than Jedi, more than Sith. He is strategist, conqueror, redeemer, breaker of armies, and binder of men. Candorus recognizes something Mandalorian in him. The will to change the galaxy by the test of battle. From world to world, the warrior follows Revan. He sees the ruins of Duxun, where the indomitable fell. He sees the hushed void of Malachor, where the ultimate perished. He listens when Revan speaks of strength, of struggle, of the purpose that lies beyond mere plunder. And slowly, he understands. The Mandalorians are not dead, only sleeping. Someone must call them awake. So it is that after Revan vanishes into the unknown regions, Candorus inherits a burden heavier than Beskar. He gathers fragments. One clan here, a forgotten cell there. He speaks with voice rough as gravel, but steady, telling of honor not lost, only misplaced. He reminds them of the Resulnare, the 6 actions that bind every Mandalorian. Wear armor, speak the tongue, defend family, raise children as warriors, rally when called, and stand with the Mandalore. At first, laughter greets him. Who is he to claim the title? Where is his mask? Where are his armies? But Candorus does not flinch. He wears no mask, he becomes the mask. He wields no vast army, he becomes the spark that will forge one. His creed is simple. The Mandalorians will rise again, but never by conquest without cause. They will endure, they will preserve. Thus the name clings to him as iron clings to a magnet. The Preserver. Yet preservation is no easy task. The galaxy shifts around him, restless as a blade in its sheath. The Jedi Order reels from betrayals, the Republic limps from one war into another, and in the cracks, the Sith fester. Candorus navigates this storm as only a Mandalorian can, with patience, stubbornness, and readiness to strike when the time is right. On Duxun, He claims the wild moon itself as fortress and proving ground. The jungle becomes a crucible for new warriors. Beasts and terrain become their enemies, until even nature bends to their will. On Nar Shaddaa, he recruits the lost and dishonored, giving them back their creed. On forgotten worlds where Beskar rusts in the dirt, he unearths relics of the past, not as trophies, but as seeds for the future. Always he speaks the same truth. We will not vanish. Not while I draw breath. Not while any of you remember who you are. But know this, child, even preservation requires blood. There are skirmishes, feuds, and betrayals. Rival claimants rise, waving banners of conquest, promising glory without discipline. Some turn pirate, staining Mandalorian names in the Outer Rim with dishonor. Canderous hunts them, fights them, breaks them, for the sake of the clan's soul. He does not conquer empires. He does not burn worlds. He does something far harder. He endures. He keeps Mandalorian identity alive through famine, through exile, through decades where the galaxy forgets their name. That is why history calls him the Preserver. To preserve through silence is harder than to conquer with shouting. And in his old age, when his bones ache like rusted armor and the fires of youth dim, still he teaches. Around campfires on Duxon, he tells younger warriors of basilisk droids that once blotted out sons, of mythosaurs whose skulls crowned banners, of Mandalores whose names were storms. He does not lie about failure. He does not hide the shame of Cathar or Sirocco. But he reminds them that shame can be a forge as well, if faced with honor. Listen carefully. What is preserved is not merely armor or language, but the soul of a people. And Canderous Ordo, Mandalore the Preserver, ensures that soul is carried across centuries like an ember wrapped in cloth, waiting for another generation to fan it into flame. Now, young one, let the ember glow gently in your mind. The Preserver has done his duty. The clans will not vanish, but embers are not enough forever. In time, others will rise to claim the mask, and the galaxy will learn again that when Mandalorians awaken, even empires tremble. Rest with that thought, and when next we wake the tale, we will walk into the age of civil war, where brothers turn on brothers, and the name Fett is forged in fire. Chapter 4, The Civil War of Clans. Draw nearer, child of the night, and let the hush of the stars settle over your shoulders like a cloak. The ember Canderous guarded glows red, but the galaxy is cold, and cold breeds quarrel. Within that hush, you will hear the sound of iron disagreeing with iron, of banners turning against banners, of brothers measuring honor with the edge of a blade. This is the Mandalorian Civil War. It begins not with shouting crowds, but with parchment and principle. Just a Mareel warrior thinker, a man whose gaze was a plumb line dropped into the depths of his people's soul, steps forward with a reform. He names it the Super Commando Codex. Fight as soldiers of fortune, yes, but fight with discipline. Be instruments, not marauders. Temper ferocity with restraint, so that contracts end in honor, not butchery. To those who heard only the old drum of conquest, it was a softening. To those who loved the clan's survival more than their swagger, it was a lifeline. Across the firelight, another voice rose. Silk over a knife. Tor Vizsla. He called Mariel's code a leash, called the years of caution a slow poison, claimed that Mandalore's heart beat only for war without apology. From his camp on Concordia, he gathered the discontented and gave them a name bright as a threat: Death Watch. Between true Mandalorians, Mariel's disciplined legion, and Death Watch, Vizsla's zeal, there formed a crack. In time, that crack would become a canyon. The first stones fell on the simple soil of Concord Dawn. There a farmer named Fett, a journeyman protector, opened his door to fugitives who wore battered plates and tired pride. Mariel and his men running the gauntlet of Death Watch patrols. He chose shelter over safety. He chose decency. Vizsla, finding the trail, bared his teeth and made a lesson of it. The farmer refused to betray. The house burned. Blaster fire stitched the air. And two children learned what hatred sounds like. Jango with ash on his face and fury in his throat. Arla dragged screaming into a future the night would not be kind to.
But listen, because Mandalorians do not leave the young to the dark without a hand. Mariel pulled Jango Fett from the maw of flame and called him son. He did more. He gave the boy a creed, a plate, a place at the fire. Adoption is not pity among the clans. It is the old magic that turns grief into belonging. The boy watched, learned, hardened. He measured himself against men older and heavier and found that he was steel, not scrap. In time, he would become Mariel's knife point. The war wandered and returned like weather. On Quarter 6, the true Mandalorians took a contract that smelled too clean. Reports lied, enemies were many, the ground itself seemed to tilt against them. Montrose, Mariel's lieutenant, broad-shouldered, hungry for command, refused recall. When fire came, he used his jetpack and left his Mandalore to the blast. Betrayal is colder than vacuum, my young one. Mariel staggered. Vizsla's cannons stitched destiny across the battlefield. The reformer fell. A silence followed. Only warriors understand. Jango, returning with the objective he had wrestled from ambush, carried Mariel's body back to the landing zone. Montrose announced himself heir. But the helmets turned toward the young man who did not boast. They saw steadiness, grief without collapsing, duty without vanity, and so they chose him. Jango Fett became leader of the true Mandalorians, not by age, but by right of being the last unbroken thing in a broken hour. War sharpened. Under Jango, the true Mandalorians moved like a single organism, quick, exact, professionally lethal. Death Watch answered with spectacle and sabotage. Vizsla, who understood pageantry as well as blood, courted a governor with soft carpets and softer lies. Galidron. The contract was a trap sewn with legal thread. Jango's men put down the local insurrection without atrocity. The governor wrote a fiction of slaughtered innocents, and Vizsla, mask gleaming, whispered into the right ears. The Jedi Council listened. They sent a strike force led by a master whose name would one day darken historiographies. Dooku. Picture now the snow-blue sky above Galidron, and beneath it a clearing where honor and misunderstanding met. Dooku demanded surrender for crimes that had not been committed. The true Mandalorians hunted too long, blamed too often, refused to kneel for a lie. Sabers bloomed, blasters spoke. 11 Jedi fell, 6 to Jango himself, before the field ran out of Mandalorians and the echo narrowed to one heartbeat. Jango was taken in chains. He was not given to justice. He was sold like cargo to a spice transport, far from courts and far from pity. There he learned a different school, patience that tastes of rust, silence that does not break your bones, the long arithmetic of revenge counted out between bulkheads. Years later, he escaped, skinny as a blade and twice as dangerous. He took back his armor from the trembling hands of the Galidran governor. He traced Vizsla to Corellia. Linger, and in a fight that sprawled through alleys and up stairwells, through breath and blood, he killed the founder of Death Watch with his own hands. You might expect a crown to appear then. But crowns made of iron have requirements beyond revenge. Jango, scorched by defeat and slavery, turned his face from the burden of Mandalore. He chose the narrow road of the hunter. Contracts, credits, quiet vengeance. While beyond him, another faction rose with a different scripture. The new Mandalorians, under Duchess Satine Kryze, built cities of clean geometry inside a sun-white desert and spoke peace like a mantra. They banished the armor to Concordia, outlawed the old swagger, recast Mandalore as a sanctuary of neutrality. For those who had watched children die in fields, the quiet felt like survival. For those who remembered the thunder of basilisk wings, it smelled like surrender. Between these visions, the clans frayed further. Death Watch scattered rather than died, their creed coiling in shadow. The true Mandalorians dwindled, noble and tired. Jango's back remained turned to thrones, and yet destiny has a talent for finding men who pretend they do not know it. The galaxy took note of Jango's precision, his discretion, his spine. In corridors where red carpets hid old blood, he was summoned by a man with aristocrat's hands and a serpent's patience. Count Dooku, now Darth Tyrannus, architect of quiet storms. The offer was not a contract. It was a proposition to become template, the face and bone of an army grown in rain-swept cities on Camino. 20 million credits. And one clause that made the iron of Jango's heart warm, an unaltered clone to raise as a son. But hush, young one, let us not outrun the road. That future belongs to another chapter. Tonight we remain where civil war leaves us, with a people cut into thirds. One prays to peace under bright domes, one sharpens knives in exile, glamorizing the blood-remembered past. One walks alone, a single warrior with a name that will echo wherever credits change hands and judgments are made at gunpoint. The Mandalorians are not extinct. They are divided. They are an idea in 3 arguments, each convinced the other 2 are betrayal. Feel the weariness of it. The long ache of families who no longer share tables. Hear the small sounds. A mother polishing a dented pauldron by lamplight, telling a child stories about Mariel's code. A Death Watch recruit sewing the red mark of vengeance into a sash. A pacifist engineer drawing cube after cube after cube, trying to make a city that cannot be invaded. Between them, the wind moves across sand that used to be forest, and the skull of a mythosaur looks down with empty patience. Do you see how the pattern forms? Reform begets backlash, backlash courts outsiders, outsiders bring ruin, ruin invites reform again. The Mandalorians walk this circle like a mantra inscribed into armor, but every circle has a seam, a place where a new thread can be pulled through. Jango's path will tug at that seam. Bo-Katan Kryze will tug at that seam. Even the child foundling with the quiet creed and the gift of the armorer's hammer will pull, years hence, at that same stubborn stitch. For now, rest in the knowledge that nothing, no betrayal, no slavery, no elegant neutrality, could kill the idea Jaster Mareel tried to save, that a Mandalorian might be both fearsome and honorable, both disciplined and free. The Codex did not burn with him on Corda 6. It smolders in men and women who have not yet met each other, in clans that have not yet shaken hands, in a future that has not yet chosen its flag. Sleep, little one. When you wake, we shall descend into rain and lightning over Tipoca City, where Jango Fett teaches soldiers who all wear his face, and where an old quarrel with the Jedi flares once more, beneath white lamps and roaring seas. Chapter 5. The galaxy's greatest bounty hunter. The storm-lashed world of Concord Dawn gave birth to a warrior whose name would echo across centuries. He was known as Jango Fett, a foundling, a survivor, a blade honed by endless conflict. His people, his clan, were broken in the Mandalorian civil wars, leaving behind only ashes, steel, and the child who would one day rise to be called the galaxy's most feared hunter. The boy learned the ways of the Rezolnare, not from gentle instruction, but from blood and necessity. He was taught to wear his armor as if it were his second skin, to defend himself and his kin, to carry forward the Mandalorian tongue, and above all, to fight. Even as a youth, Jango's body was lithe and fierce, his hands quick, his mind sharper still. A mentor, whose name the winds of history have obscured, forged him into a warrior of terrible skill. From him, Jango learned the creed that strength was not given by bloodline, but earned by deed. The Mandalorian civil wars scarred him deeply. The boy fought not as a soldier among thousands, but as a survivor among ruins. He saw clans rise and fall. He saw Beskar-clad titans toppled by betrayal, and through it all he endured. When the embers of war grew cold, Jango turned to the galaxy beyond, not as a conqueror, but as a hunter. For war was his heritage, and bounty hunting was simply war by another name. In time, Jango's name became legend. He strode across worlds like a shadow, his twin Westar 34 blasters always quick to strike. He walked beside the infamous Aura Singh, crossed paths with Cad Bane, traded steel and fire with Hondo Onaka. He was known on Nar Shaddaa, feared on Coruscant, and respected in the underworld dens where criminals whispered of prices and prey. His starship, the Slave One, was both hunter and executioner, its seismic charges shattering the silence of deep space like thunderbolts hurled by the gods. Yet Jango was not reckless. He was patient, measured, a man who chose his bounties carefully. Every duel, every hunt, every contract was a stepping stone, raising his reputation until few dared to challenge his supremacy. He was no longer merely a Mandalorian, he was the Mandalorian, the living embodiment of their iron creed. It was then that Darth Tyrannus came to him. Count Dooku, Sith Lord and manipulator of destinies, sought a template, a warrior whose flesh and spirit could be multiplied 1,000,000-fold. Jango was summoned to the moons of Bogdan, where the air was thin and the night eternal. There he faced the trials of other hunters, and one by one he outmatched them all. In victory, he was offered what no other mortal could claim, to be the genetic father of an army. The Kaminoan cloners called it science, but Jango knew what it meant.
his face, his blood, his skills, copied and multiplied into endless ranks of soldiers. An army bred to fight wars not their own. He accepted the price, 20 million credits and one request. One clone unaltered, a son. And thus, Boba Fett was born. Not as property of Kamino, but as Jango's child. The boy learned the hunter's trade from his father's own hand. Carried aboard Slave One, taught the ways of combat, piloting, and survival. Though many in the galaxy would scoff at the thought, Jango was not without tenderness. He looked upon the boy and saw not a tool, but a legacy. Yet destiny is cruel. As the shadow of war lengthened, Jango became entangled in the designs of the Sith. On Coruscant, he conspired with Zam Wesell to end the life of Senator Padme Amidala, and in so doing drew the attention of the Jedi. Obi-Wan Kenobi tracked the trail to Kamino, where in the endless rain he confronted Jango Fett. The two fought upon the slick landing platforms, blaster against saber, jetpack against force. Jango survived, though his armor bore new scars, and he fled with his son into the stars. The pursuit ended on Geonosis. There, in the great arena of Petranaki, amid sand and stone and the cries of beasts, Jango stood at Count Dooku's side. The Jedi descended in numbers, their sabers flashing like a storm of light. Jango fought with unrelenting ferocity, his blasters cutting down Jedi knights, his flamethrower searing the air. It was he who struck down Jedi Master Coleman Traber, his precision unmatched even in chaos. But fate is never without irony. A reeking beast, massive and enraged, trampled him, damaging his jetpack and leaving him vulnerable. And into that moment of weakness stepped Mace Windu, the champion of the Jedi Order. The two faced one another in the dust of the arena. Jango fired, blasters spitting plasma, but Windu's violet blade danced, deflecting every shot. He reached for his jetpack, but it sputtered, broken, betraying him. And with one final stroke, clean and merciless, Windu's saber severed Jango's head from his body. Thus ended the Iron Father, but death was not silence. His son, Boba, knelt beside the helmet, cradling the empty shell of his father's life. Around them, the clone war erupted. Millions of soldiers bred from Jango's blood, hurling themselves into battle at the command of the very Jedi who slew him. His face became their face, his voice their voice, his life multiplied across the galaxy. Jango Fett was gone, but his legacy was eternal.
For every clone who fought, every stormtrooper who marched, every Mandalorian who remembered his name, all carried a fragment of the Iron Father. And Boba, his son, would rise to continue the legend.
Close your eyes now, my young one, and picture the storm on Kamino, the endless rain striking the ocean. Hear the echo of blaster fire in the arena of Geonosis. And remember, one man, one Mandalorian gave his flesh to shape the destiny of the galaxy. Chapter 6. Boba Fett. The boy who clutched a hollow helmet upon the sands of Geonosis, Linga, was no ordinary orphan. He was Boba Fett, the unaltered heir of Jango, shaped not by bloodline alone, but by a legacy of steel, fire, and loss. From the moment Jango's severed helm rolled across the arena floor, the galaxy became a harsher place for young Boba. He had not only lost a father, he had lost a teacher, a protector, and a compass.
The boy's heart became a forge where grief smoldered into vengeance. Under the wing of the pirate Hondo Ohnaka, and later the cunning bounty hunter Aurra Sing, Boba learned to harden his sorrow into a weapon. Alongside Bossk, the Trandoshan, and the others of their gang, he began to walk his father's path. Yet in every mission, in every cruel exchange, there echoed the same thought: Mace Windu must pay. And so he tried. With guile and fire, the boy laid traps for the Jedi Master who had struck down his sire. He sabotaged Republic ships, lured Jedi into death traps, and even placed an explosive charge within Jango's shattered helmet. But Windu survived. Time and again, the Jedi slipped away, while Boba found himself betrayed by his allies or captured by the Republic. The galaxy seemed determined to teach him patience. Yet, patience was not the way of the Fett blood. Years passed. The Clone Wars devoured the stars. The Republic fell, and in its ashes arose the Empire. And still, Boba sharpened himself. He apprenticed under mercenaries of every stripe, learning from Bossk the art of the hunt, from Dengar the persistence of survival, and even from the legendary Cad Bane, whose cunning rivaled that of any Sith. Each lesson added a new plate of armor, invisible but heavy, around the boy who was swiftly becoming a man. When he finally donned his father's Beskar again, scarred, painted, green and red with vengeance, Boba Fett ceased to be the orphan clutching a helmet. Linger. He became the hunter feared in every shadowed port and cantina across the galaxy. His starship, the Slave One, was his winged shadow. With its seismic charges and hidden weapons, it brought ruin upon frigates, freighters, and warships alike. Smugglers whispered of its banshee roar in hyperspace, for to be pursued by that vessel was to already be caught. And in its holds, prisoner cages waited, ready to swallow the unlucky. It was in this era of fire and iron that Boba's name was whispered by the mighty themselves. Darth Vader called upon him. The Black Sun sought him. Jabba the Hutt paid him handsomely. Each bounty delivered only sharpened his renown, until no corner of the galaxy was free from his shadow. Yet Boba's rise was not without rivalry. Other hunters, fearsome names like IG-88, Zuckuss, and Dengar, measured themselves against him, but time and again Fett proved faster, colder, and more relentless. Where they sought fortune, Boba sought reputation, and it was this hunger for an enduring name that set him apart. To those who hired him, he became more than a man. He was inevitability itself, a storm given shape. And in cantinas across the Outer Rim, whispers grew. If Fett is hunting you, your fate is already sealed. Yet his defining hunt was for one man, Han Solo. On Bespin, Boba tracked the Corellian smuggler with relentless precision, waiting for the moment to strike. He stood silent as Vader froze Solo in carbonite, claiming the prize as his own. In the dim cargo bay of Slave One, Solo's body, trapped between life and death, became a trophy of the Fett name. The galaxy shuddered, for once more a Fett had brought down a legend. But even legends stumbled at the pit of Car Koon, before the leering crowd of Jabba's court. Boba stood ready to prevent Solo's rescue. His armor gleamed, his jetpack primed. And yet fate is cruel. A staff struck his pack, fire flared, and in a blast of confusion, the feared hunter was hurled into the maw of the Sarlacc. The galaxy rejoiced. The unkillable Fett was dead at last. But they were wrong. For in the choking darkness of the beast, Boba refused to yield. He clawed, burned, and carved his way free, scarred and broken, but alive. His armor was stolen by scavengers, leaving him bare. On the dunes of Tatooine, he was taken in by the most unlikely of kin, the Tusken Raiders. Among them, the hunter became a student once more. They clothed him in desert black, taught him the ways of survival, and shared their fires and their water. In their company, Boba rediscovered something he had long buried, belonging. He joined their rites, crafted his own Gaddafi stick from sacred wood, and became part of their tribe. For a fleeting time, he was not Fett the hunter, nor Fett the orphan, but Fett the brother. Fett, when the tribe was slain by outsiders, his fury was tempered not into reckless vengeance, but into resolve. He would build something greater, something lasting upon the sands of Tatooine. Thus he reclaimed his armor, confronting Din Djarin, the child of the Watch, and proving by chain code and bloodline that the Beskar belonged to him. Yet in that meeting, there was no arrogance, no boast, only the quiet certainty of a man reclaiming his birthright. With Djarin and the assassin Fennec Shand, Fett struck at Imperial remnants, even crossing paths with Moff Gideon and the Darksaber. And when the wars of Grogu and Gideon faded, Fett turned his gaze upon Tatooine itself. With quiet wrath he slew Bib Fortuna and seized Jabba's throne. At last, Boba Fett ceased to serve others. He would rule. Not as a Huttish tyrant, but as a daimyo seeking respect over fear. The struggle was immense. The twins of Nal Hutta, the Pike Syndicate, even his old master Cad Bane rose against him. Yet Boba endured, rallying rankers and outcasts alike, and brought victory to Mos Espa. In the end, the people bowed, not because they were broken, but because they chose him. Thus the boy who once clutched a hollow helmet had become something far greater. As daimyo of Mos Espa, Boba discovered that ruling was a hunt of a different kind. It was not enough to kill rivals. He had to balance fear with respect, violence with diplomacy. Each day brought a new challenge: the deceit of Mayor Mok Shaiz, the treachery of the Pikes, and the wary glances of the very people he sought to lead. And yet, the Fett who had once lived only for vengeance now sought stability. In his court, warriors, mercenaries, and street urchins alike found place. He was no longer the solitary hunter. He was the center of a web, binding chaos into order. Thus the boy who once clutched a hollow helmet had become something far greater. His path was not flawless. It was jagged, scarred, and lined with shadows. Yet it was his. Boba Fett, son of Jango, was the living proof that Mandalorian legacy is not bound by creed alone, nor by armor, nor by clan. It is bound by endurance, by the will to rise again, even when swallowed whole. And so the galaxy whispers still of the son of Iron, the hunter who became a king. Chapter 7, the Princess of Mandalore. She was born into the fire of contradiction. Bo-Katan Kryze, daughter of Mandalore's proud House Kryze, breathed her first in a palace that believed not in war but in peace. Her sister Duchess Satine ruled as a pacifist, seeking to guide Mandalore away from its ancient warrior ways. But Bo-Katan was of a different mold, her blood running hotter, her heart beating for the clash of blade and blaster. To one sister fell the throne of peace, to the other the burden of war. As a young warrior, Bo-Katan turned to the Death Watch, a faction that rejected Satine's pacifism and longed for Mandalore to once more embrace the creed of battle. In the hidden domes of Concordia, she rose swiftly, her keen eye and sharper tongue winning her command of the Night Owls, an elite band of women who struck like shadows, swift and merciless. They wore blue and grey armor crested with the owl's mark, and they followed Bo-Katan not merely for duty, but for the fire that burned within her. It was in this role that she first learned the true curse of power, that it draws the attention of monsters. The monster that came was named Maul, a Sith Lord scarred by betrayal and blood. He arrived at the side of VIII, leader of Death Watch, whispering promises of conquest. Together they raised the Shadow Collective, binding Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, and even the Hutt clans into one criminal fist. With their strength, Mandalore was seized, Duchess Satine overthrown, and VIII crowned ruler. For a heartbeat, Bo-Katan believed her world was restored. But the Sith deal was poison. Maul challenged Vizsla under the ancient law of single combat, and the duel ended with the red blade of a Darksaber striking true. VIII fell, head severed from body, and Maul claimed the throne of Mandalore. To Bo-Katan, this was heresy. Mandalore could not, would not kneel to an outsider, least of all a Sith. She and her Night Owls rebelled, breaking Satine from her prison and calling on Obi-Wan Kenobi, her sister's old love, to aid them. But Mandalore was already drowning in fire. Maul murdered Satine before Obi-Wan's eyes, and Bo-Katan's rebellion became a desperate struggle for survival. The siege of Mandalore followed, thundering across the cities of glass and iron. Bo-Katan stood with the Republic, urging them to strike, and strike they did. The 501st Legion, led by Ahsoka Tano, came with fire and soldiers, and at last Maul was driven into chains. For a brief moment, Bo-Katan ascended, named Regent of Mandalore, Lady of House Kryze. Yet her rule was a fragile crown, for the Republic crumbled and became the Empire, and she would not bend knee to Palpatine's throne. In her defiance, Mandalore was gifted instead to Clan Saxon Imperial loyalists, and Bo-Katan fell once more into exile. Years of shadow followed, years in which her people tore themselves apart under the Empire's yoke. Then came Sabine Wren of Clan Wren, bearing the ancient weapon of authority, the Darksaber. Sabine sought a leader who could rally the fractured clans. She saw in Bo-Katan the fire of a Mandalore, and she placed the blade in her hands. At first, Bo-Katan refused, wary of destiny's weight, but in the end, she accepted. With the clans behind her, she raised the Darksaber high, and for a moment, Mandalore knew unity again. But fate, cruel and patient, waits always. The Empire struck in vengeance, raining down the night of 1,000 tears. Skies turned black, cities melted into glass, and Mandalore was reduced to ash and ruin. Bo-Katan's armies were shattered, her weapon lost to the grasp of Moff Gideon, and her people scattered among the stars. From that night onward she carried the bitter guilt of failure, haunted by whispers that she had not truly earned the Darksaber in combat. To be Mandalore without victory was to rule with a hollow crown. Exile hardened her further. She gathered the remnants of her night owls, allies like Axe-Woves and Koska Reeves, and struck imperial targets in raids, seeking weapons to one day reclaim her world. It was in such times that she crossed paths with Din Djarin, the wandering Mandalorian of the Children of the Watch, and the child Grogu. She saved them from death upon the sea, and in turn their destinies became entwined. With Djarin's aid, she seized Imperial warships, captured Gideon's cruiser, and stood on the cusp of reclaiming her rightful blade, only for Din himself to unknowingly claim the Darksaber by defeating Gideon. Here destiny mocked her again. Din offered the blade freely, but Bo-Katan refused, bound by the ancient law that it must be won in battle. Fear of her past faltering made her hesitate, and the weapon remained beyond her grasp. For a time, she wandered once more, burdened by loss, watching as others doubted her claim. But Mandalore was not finished with her. When Din was struck down by a cyborg in the ruins of their homeworld, Bo-Katan seized the Darksaber in defense of him. She wielded it with clarity, her movements precise, her spirit aflame. And in this act, the ancient bond of blade and bearer was sealed. She had earned the weapon at last, not by gift, but by deed. With Darksaber in hand, she gathered the scattered clans. Armored warriors rose from the shadows, from the sands, from the stars. Together they descended upon Mandalore, facing Imperial remnants who clung like carrion to the corpse of the planet. Fire and blaster rang through the caverns. Skies burned with jetpacks and flame, and Bo-Katan led them as only one of iron and flame could. At last, the Imperials were broken, and she relit the Great Forge, the heart of Mandalorian craft and culture. The ashes of Mandalore stirred with new life, and the promise of rebirth stood radiant before them. In the silence that followed, as the forge's fires glowed against her visor, Bo-Katan stood tall. She had lost a sister, lost a world, lost the Darksaber, and lost it again. Yet still she endured. She was the sister of flames, sometimes consumed by them, sometimes guided by them, but never extinguished. Her people bowed not in submission, but in shared resolve. For they knew at last that Mandalore had a leader forged by trial, tempered by sorrow, and reborn in fire. Thus ends the tale of Bo-Katan Kryze, daughter of House Kryze, Night Owl, Rebel, and Mandalore. Her story is not of perfection, but of persistence, of rising, falling, and rising again, as only a Mandalorian can. Chapter 8, The Way of Beskar. Listen now, child of midnight, to the slow heartbeat of iron. Hear the hush before the hammer falls, the breath drawn in the throat of the forge, the ember's patient glow beneath the anvil stone. This is where Mandalorians are born and reborn. Not in cradles, but in fire. Not in temples, but in workshops that smell of oil and ozone and the sharp perfume of scorched metal. They say the world turns, The Mandalorian says the world is turned by the hammer. Beskar, the Iron of Legends, remembers every strike. It drinks heat like a desert drinks dawn. It holds the shape assigned to it with stubborn, unyielding grace. When drawn from the earth, Beskar is moon pale and quiet. When woken beneath the hammer, it sings like a low bell. And when it is finished, cooled in oil and prayer, it knows the curve of the wearer's breath and the angle of the wearer's will. A plate is not a plate, it is a promise, and the promise is this: you will endure. Each helm, with its T-shaped visor, is a mask of unity over 1,000 differences. Within there may be human or Zabrak, Twi'lek or Togorian, the rare Mandalorian giant, or the slight and swift of Concord dawn. Without, there is only the line of the visor, the shadowed gaze of the clans. Colors whisper quiet meanings: green for duty, blue for reliability, black for justice, a fierce sand gold for vengeance held in check. And sigils speak low heraldry: the mythosaur's skull, the owl of the night owls, the sigils of clan and house, of hard-won trials and holy oaths. Paint flakes in time, yes, but the oath does not linger. The Rezulnair, the 6 actions, are set like rivets through the armor of life. Wear your armor, speak your language, defend yourself and your kin, raise your children as Mandalorians, rally when the Mandalore calls, and contribute to the clan's welfare. Simple words, iron rules. In settled cities, they sound like ancient poetry. In the wastes, they sound like the morning chores. A mother buffs a chest plate while the stew simmers. A father teaches a grip change on a blaster before teaching how to mend a strap. Grandparents correct pronunciation in Mandoa, that spare, flexible tongue with more insults for cowardice than stars in a winter sky. For among the children of Mandalore, blood is a detail, action is lineage. To speak the words, Nikirtail Gaisa Ad, I know your name as my child, is to forge a family hotter than the forge itself. They live as nomads, even when they build with stone. VIII, modular homes, rise and collapse in a day. Streets kink and bend to deny invaders clear fire. Tunnels like veins wind beneath villages so that retreat is merely a change of hallway. They break bread and drink shig, the spiced comfort that warms cold hands. They pack each cake in waxed cloth, sweet enough to mend sorrow. They argue over the best tingula, whether the peppers should sting like a scorpion's dream or merely kiss the lips. And they laugh as the ale, Netragal, turns black as night in their cups. In the dusk, they gather to sing, their voices low, old marching hymns and field songs that only sound like war to strangers, but in truth are lullabies of survival. Children begin with small plates and large ideas. At 13, they face the Vertigoten, stepping from childhood into the armor of adulthood. No parade, no gaudy proclamation, only the quiet testing of skill, of courage, of restraint. A blade put aside when a word suffices, a word sharpened when a blade would waste a life. Games teach as surely as scars. Kubikad, the stabbing chess of knives and squares. Meshkaroya, bolo ball, played in armor on dust courts under twin suns. Breathwork to steady the hand, cadence to steady the heart. And at night, by lantern glow, the names of the lost are spoken softly, without fear, so that memory does not learn the bad habit of forgetting.
This is I Han, joy braided with grief, the sweet ache of a people who dine with the living and set a place for the fallen. Linger. Her faith is not a temple of walls, but a horizon of deeds. Some speak of the Manda, the shared soul of all Mandalorians, a great unseen campfire from which courage is borrowed and to which honor is returned. Others speak of Kadharangir, the destroyer, who breaks the brittle so that the supple can grow, and of Arasuum, the stagnant, the trap of comfort that rots the blade within the scabbard. Yet in practice, faith is a choice repeated, to rise, to repair, to return. Armor is mended, bridges are rebuilt, children are adopted. Enemies, sometimes, are forgiven, though never without memory. Do they make war? Yes, as a blacksmith makes tools, with care, with purpose, with craft. Against the Jedi, those ascetics of light and paradox, the Mandalorians honed 1,000 counters, whipcords that snare a saber arm, durasteel shields that bloom like flowers, shrieker darts, and sound bombs that turn focus to static, jetpacks to break the tyranny of gravity, patience to wait the breath between a parry and the next strike. Some call that enmity, the wise call it dialogue in steel. For every Mandalorian who cursed a Jedi's name, there was another who fought beside one when the galaxy truly burned. And for every Jedi who mistrusted a visor's black stare, there was another who admired its unflinching discipline. Observe the great forge, now relit, and understand a people. When the bellows breathe, the air becomes an oath. The armorer reads the flow of molten metal as other priests read auguries. A bead of slag tells of an impatience to be filed away. A hairline crack tells of a lie to be confessed before the plate is trusted. A foundling stands nearby, clutching a small vambrace still too large. The flames paint courage on the child's cheeks. Bo-Katan's shadow passes across the wall. The anvils answer with ringing approval. In such moments, governments are irrelevant. The state cannot own a soul tempered this way. Consider their laws of hospitality, rigid yet generous. Boots come off at the threshold. Blaster is checked on the table. Safety on, muzzle down. A pledge of peace in metal form. To refuse a meal is to refuse kinship. To accept and pay later is to bind a debt with honor. Insult is currency, they spend it freely among friends, yet disrespect for the elderly is unforgivable. For any old Mandalorian has survived enough to be a library, and libraries are not burned. There are thieves among them, yes, Darmanda too, those cut off from the shared soul by choice or by sorrow. There are clans that forget and clans that remember too much. There are factions that bend creed into cudgel and sects that make a mirror of a visor and call it truth. But even these drift in time back to the central fire. They come for a child's verdegoten, for a cousin's wedding vow, mi solus tome, mi solus dartome, mi medinui an, mi bajuri verde. We are one together, we are one apart. We share all, we will raise warriors. A vow spoken under breath, across stars, over crackling comms, binding even if the only witness is the night. On market days, armorers haggle like poets. Farmers with hands scarred by plowshares and vibroblades trade seed and stories. Speeder mechanics sell rebuilt jets that cough twice and then purr like contented loath cats. Children weave braids for pauldron trophies. Elders sharpen knives with the same patience they use to sharpen minds. And always, tucked into satchels and pockets, there is a square of ooch cake for a hungry stranger, a strip of gihal for the long march, a flask of tihar to be uncorked
when the stars look lonely. Against power they stand as stone in river. Empires arrive, confident and well uniformed. Empires depart, their banners frayed by wind and time. The Mandalorian does not measure life in regimes. They measure it in how many times the breastplate was mended, in whether the helmet fits a daughter as well as it fit her mother, in how swiftly a stranger becomes Vod, brother, sister, once the oath is spoken and the work is shared. You ask me, little shadow, if their armor makes them invincible. No. Armor buys a chance, not a destiny. Prowess buys a battle, not a future. What makes a Mandalorian invincible is repetition. The unglamorous heroism of getting up, of donning plates yet again, of tightening straps, of stepping out into the chill morning, where a hunt, a harvest, a rescue, a reconciliation, some necessary labor awaits. This is the way, not as slogan, but as muscle memory. And so, as the forge breathes, and the night outside leans close to listen,
remember the litany that even the smallest foundling knows. Ideas cannot be killed. The visor is a window, not a wall. The clan is a verb, not a noun. Beskar is a promise, not a prison. When the Jedi come, they will find opponents, perhaps allies, always equals. When empires come, they will learn humility. When famine comes, the Mandalorian will split UJ cake and survive. When peace comes, they will tend it like a garden, watchful, armed, but grateful.
Close your eyes now. Hear the hammer's last stroke fade into the dark. Smell the oil. Feel phantom warmth upon your face. And know this. Somewhere beneath unbroken sky, a helm cools on an anvil, and a child reaches out to claim it. The plate will be too large today. Tomorrow, less so. And one night, when the stars are old and you are steady of hand and quiet of soul, you will fit the armor as if it were always yours. For in Mandalore's way, nothing worth wearing ever belonged to one person alone. It belongs to the clan, to the future, to the idea that has outlived every throne. Sleep, little foundling. The iron remembers you. Chapter 9. The Shattered Throne. Hush, little wanderer. Draw nearer to the embers and listen. The forge has fallen quiet, but the metal still remembers the blows that shaped it. And the wind still carries the names of those who would not bend. Tonight we turn our gaze to the long dusk of Mandalore, when banners were lowered, helms were bowed, and the throne itself cracked under the weight of betrayal. This is the tale of the shattered throne. In the first days, after the Republic's last breath, a new order spread its cloak across the stars. Uniformed, orderly, so very certain of itself, the Empire spoke of stability. Its admirals called it peace. On Mandalore, that promise came wrapped in the sigil of Clan Saxon, newly raised as imperial stewards, over a world that would not kneel. Saxon courtiers walked the polished floors of Sundari, measured steps, measured smiles, and assured the people that strength had merely changed uniforms. Yet the scent beneath their perfumes was the same old iron. Compliance first, culture later, or never.
Bo-Katan would not bend, and so she was cast from the royal light into the patient grey of exile. In her place, the Saxons trimmed the creed to fit an imperial scabbard. The great dome of Sundari glittered as always, but the air felt thinner. The once proud Bice tilted to show faces on command. The hissing breath of fear became a custom none dared name. In the Outlands, however, the clans remembered their shapes. They taught children to oil plates, to speak Mandoa softly so patrols could not hear, to kick dust over cook fires, and to listen for the hum of distant engines as one listens for oncoming storms. On Crownest, the banners of Clan Wren lifted in the snow light and would not fall. Countess Ursa Wren set her jaw like a blade, and Sabine, the daughter with paint on her fingers and fire in her words, carried shame and hope in equal measure. Their struggle was not polished. Struggle seldom is. Raids and rescues, whispered alliances, careful ambushes among the frost-limbed pines. They fought not to conquer, but to keep memory unbroken. The language at table, the vow at marriage, the hammer's hymn. And across the white valleys, children learned to skate on silence while mothers hid the shape of their armor beneath plain cloaks. The Darksaber, ancient tongue of right to rule, traveled like a comet through those troubled skies. It lay for a season in Sabine's hands, light and weight at once. Then, with humility and purpose, she offered it to Bo-Katan, that Mandalore might rally to a single star. For a breath of history, the clans answered, helmets raised, jetpacks kindled, drums of heart and forge in time. But empires do not sleep, my young one. They recite ledgers and return with interest. There came then a night without music, the night of 1,000 tears, when the heavens lowered their lids and rained down metal, weeping fire. Wings of stone-hearted craft turned cities to glass, fields curled like paper, vaults split and spilled the history within. In streets designed to confuse invaders, even the echoes lost their way. Some called it extermination. Mandalorians called it what it was, attempted forgetting. For the Empire sought not merely lives, but continuity. Break the line between grandparent and child, and a people falls into silence. Yet even in that midnight, courage moved quietly. Armorers gathered what Beskar they could carry, quenching hot plates in oil and tears. Warriors lifted the young, the old, the injured, and threaded them through the honeycomb of tunnels toward shadowed transports. In the skies, scattered night owls drew fire like decoys, so caravans of memory could pass. And somewhere in the smoking dark, the last Darksaber bearer slipped into ruin and did not rise with the blade. When dawn finally came, it glittered in the fist of Moff Gideon, a black crown raised in mockery. The symbol of sovereignty had been seized, the music of authority stolen. What followed was not defeat, but scattering. Clans became embers, hidden in caves and cellars, in freight holds and backroom shrines. Some bent their creeds into narrow shapes to survive, others broadened them into bridges, gathering foundlings as rain gathers in a cistern. A people of planets became a people of coverts, small, silent workshops of faith beneath louder worlds. Helmets were kept on not out of pride but prudence. Names were traded like passwords. A single phrase, "This is the way," grew from proverb into lifeline, passed hand to hand like uje cake shared in famine. And still they worked,
Even fugitives must eat, even exiles must mend. Armor was patched with unglamorous care. Plates were re-riveted to the beating chest. Blacksmiths taught new apprentices the patient grammar of blows. In one cupboard, a fresh-smelted pauldron cooled beneath a prayer. In another, a whipcord launcher was tuned to sing true. In a third, an elder traced the mythosaur upon the dust, so a child might remember where to set the feet in battle and in dance. The Empire measured progress in sectors pacified. Mandalorians measured it in children kept alive long enough to choose the creed for themselves. Do not imagine, little one, that sorrow ended with the ash. Sorrow simply changed uniforms. Some clans turned Darmander, souls set adrift by too much loss. Mercenary bands traded old songs for new credits. The throne room gathered dust while titled halls became warehouses for plundered Beskar. And yet, listen. Beneath the clatter of commerce, one could hear a quieter sound. The counting of names at bedtime, the vow softly spoken across light years, the careful apology between rivals who needed one another more than they needed to be right. This too is warfare, the mending of trust under occupation. Sabine's path braided again with Bo-Katan's, but the braid frayed under grief and guilt. How heavy is a gift when the giver doubts her right to give. How sharp is a blade when the bearer doubts her right to bear. And in the gap where certainty should have stood, Gideon strutted with captive light in his hand. He held the Darksaber not as a steward but as a jailer, and with it he wrote a lie upon the sky. Mandalore belongs to the victor. Lies have short legs, child. They cannot run far, but they can trample much before they stumble. In the far places, children of the watch stirred old embers. Their creed, tight as a fist, bright as a coal, kept many alive, even as it asked much. Helm on, word kept, foundlings first. A man named for silence carried the way like a lantern, and beside him toddled a small life with wide eyes, reminding a warrior people that tenderness is also an armor. Elsewhere, the night owls learned to make patience a weapon, to turn hunger into focus, to let rumor of their return do work that blasters could not. And in backwater towns, Beskar changed hands like contraband scripture, each plate a verse from a book the Empire had tried to burn. What of the throne? Its stone cooled, spiders spun between its steps. Yet even without a seated figure, Mandalore's sovereignty did not die. Authority wore different helms, spoke from different forges, fed different children. The throne had never been the heart, the forge had. When the night stole cities, the people moved the heart into their tents and ships, into their stubborn chests. Empires misunderstand this. Thrones are simple things to shatter, hearts less so. And so the shattered throne became not an ending, but a season, a winter that pruned but did not kill. Snow presses branches down, yes, but roots learn the way of stone, and when the thaw comes, they remember upward. In scattered cantinas, a verse would surface unbidden. We were promised extinction, we delivered endurance. Linger. Quiet toasts followed. Tihar lifted for the lost, Netragal for the victories that could not yet be named aloud. When at last whispers reached the coverts that the great forge breathed again, they traveled like warmth through a camp of the weary. Some wept, some laughed, some simply tightened straps and said nothing at all. For Mandalorians have learned not to break the spell by speaking too soon. But in their silence, decisions were made. Helmets were polished.
Old feuds were nursed less and salved more. The scattered began to angle ever so slightly toward home. Remember, young one, thrones shatter, ideas do not. The Empire learned this too late. Learned that Beskar is more than metal and the creed more than words. That a people whose lullabies are also marches cannot be catalogued into compliance. They can be scorched, scattered, silenced for a time, but only for a time. The hammer is already lifting again. Close your eyes. Hear how the night, even now, thrums with jetpack wings in some far cavern. How a whetstone kisses a blade. How an elder tests the weight of a tiny helm and nods. The shattered throne remains in pieces, yes, but the hands that will set it right are steady, and they are many. Sleep, little foundling. Tomorrow the embers will be brighter. Chapter 10. The Darksaber. Hush, little one. The forge grows hotter tonight. Flames dance on Beskar, as though they remember every hand that has held the hammer, every oath spoken with fire at the edge of the visor. And in that glow, there gleams a blade not of steel, but of shadow, the Darksaber, the weapon that chained and unchained Mandalore across centuries. It was not simply a sword. It was a promise, a curse, a weight heavier than any pauldron. Let us follow its path through ruin and redemption. The blade had always been more than weapon. Forged by Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi, it sang with history. When raised, it declared not just skill in battle, but right to rule, binding clans beneath its glow. When lost, it whispered division, sowing rivalries sharper than any edge. And so, after the night of 1,000 tears, when Moff Gideon raised it above broken stone, Mandalorians across the stars felt a wound reopen. He was no heir of Vizsla, no voice of Mandalore. He was a thief in a uniform of iron-gray lies. Yet the Darksaber in his hand gave his theft a flavor of legitimacy. And for many years his shadow lengthened over what remained of the clans. But shadows are never still. In the Outer Rim, far from Mandalore's glass plains, warriors whispered of Bo-Katan Kryze. She had held the blade once, though not won by duel, and that wound of ritual festered in her. Yet, though she had lost it, she had not lost her fire. In quiet cantinas and covert caves, Mandalorians weighed her name like a coin, scarred but not debased, flawed yet still valuable. Some longed for her to reclaim the saber, others doubted she could. And all the while the children of the Watch spoke of prophecy, that Mandalore would only rise when the creed was kept without compromise. Enter then a man of silence, helm never lifted, Din Djarin. A foundling raised by creed tighter than chain mail, who believed himself a simple bounty hunter, but carried in his hands the fate of Mandalore. He won the Darksaber not with ambition, but by chance, defeating Gideon in combat to rescue the child called Grogu. When he tried to yield the weapon to Bo-Katan, the blade refused her, for the creed of combat could not be cheated. What is taken as gift bears no weight. What is taken by duel bears all. And so Mandalore's people faced yet another fracture,
caught between old laws and desperate needs. The Darksaber, for all its legend, was a heavy tool in Djarin's hand. Its pull resisted him, its weight dragged his strikes wide. Each swing felt like wrestling with history itself. Yet though his body struggled, his heart did not. He bore the weapon not for conquest, but for protection. Of Grogu, of the clans, of any who placed trust in him. It was this humility, this lack of hunger, that made the blade's refusal a kind of paradox. The one most worthy of ruling Mandalore wished it least. And that is the cruel jest of the Darksaber. It tests not strength alone, but intent, punishing those who crave power and confusing those who shun it. Bo-Katan's own journey wound alongside his. She fought beside him in storming Imperial remnants, freed captives with his help, and reclaimed fragments of her old command. Yet every glance at the saber in his hand burned like salt in an old wound. She remembered her sister's pacifism, her own alliance with Deathwatch, the civil wars that had cost Mandalore so dearly. Was she cursed to repeat the same pattern, to claim leadership yet again only to lose it? Or could she, if the saber came to her by fate rather than gift, finally unite what had been shattered? The test came not in council chambers, but in ruin. Deep within Mandalore's husks, where the planet still whispered with radiation and ghosts, Djarin was captured by a machine of cold cruelty, a cyborg scavenger. Bo-Katan cut her way through steel and smoke to save him, and in that desperate clash, she seized the Darksaber. In her hands it sang, weightless, eager, as though blade and bearer remembered one another. She fought with it as naturally as with her twin pistols, turning back the machine with strokes that felt not forced but fluent. And though she returned the blade to Djarin when the fight was done, the truth had already spoken. She was its master now, by right of battle and by the blade's own accord. The clans stirred at this. To see Bo-Katan wield the Darksaber once more was to see history bend, however briefly, toward healing. She called the scattered to her banner, children of the watch, night owls, warriors without crests. The disagreements did not vanish, nor the scars, but the prospect of Mandalore relit the embers of unity. For the first time in generations, Mandalorians began to speak not only of survival, but of return. The great forge, silent so long, might yet burn again, but the blade's shadow lengthened, even in triumph. Gideon returned, armored in Beskar black, wielding not faith, but fear. He sought to make Mandalorians extinct by their own history, turning clones, machines, and strategies against them. In the crucible of that battle, the Darksaber met its end. Crushed in Gideon's gauntlet, its light died, its legend snapped like brittle iron. For a heartbeat, the clans trembled. Was their symbol gone? Was Mandalore cursed again to scatter? Yet in that moment, Bo-Katan lifted her helm and spoke plain. The Darksaber was never the way. We are the way. The creed had always been larger than a single blade. Beskar, after all, is strong, not because of one plate, but because plates are forged together. A throne is not wood or stone, but the people who choose to bow or to stand. In its destruction, the Darksaber finally released Mandalore from its centuries-old chain. And so the shadow lifted. The great forge roared again. Survivors knelt, not to a blade, but to one another. Bo-Katan Kryze lit the fires of homecoming. Din Djarin kept the creed alive among foundlings, and Grogu, tiny hand upon the forge's edge,
reminded all that Mandalore's story was not only inheritance, but adoption. In the ruins, laughter rose again, careful but real. Remember this, little one. Weapons are tools, not truths. The Darksaber was both gift and curse, yet even shattered it could not silence the Mandalorian heart. That heart still beats, louder now, calling its people home. Chapter 11. The Reforging of Mandalore. Come closer, little flame. The night is generous, and the coals are patient. Hear how the cavern breathes now that the great forge is awake again. Each inhalation a bellows, each exhalation a hymn. This is the hour after tempest, the first steady hour when hands stop shaking and begin to build. Watch with me as Mandalore lifts itself from ash and glass and learns to wear hope without flinching. At first there was only sound. Hammer to anvil, hammer to rivet, hammer to memory. The rhythm traveled like a heartbeat through the ruined halls beneath Sundari's fallen dome. Sparks found old soot and sketched constellations on the air. The armorer moved among the anvils with priestly calm, reading stress lines like palmistry, quenching plates in oil while murmuring the quiet benedictions of the craft. Around her, old enemies stood shoulder to shoulder, night owls with cobalt sigils, children of the watch with helms kept on out of instinct and courtesy, mercenaries who had learned better manners from famine than from etiquette. None spoke of the past louder than was useful. All spoke of the work. Bo-Katan Kryze stood with visor raised in the forge's light, a living standard that did not flutter. She did not stride or shout. She directed with small motions, a commander who had learned the arrogance burned out of banners. There, she would say, and the cranes groaned into place. Not that plate, this one. And a child fetched the right piece with solemn pride. Axe woves moved where fire met wind, barking orders to flight crews, refurbishing jetpacks, inspecting seals with a pilot's superstition. Koska Reeves organized salvage details, her voice steady in the dust storm of tasks. Even the air seemed to thicken with purpose, and Mandalore, cut to the quick again and again, began to clot. In the tunnels, water returned. Dehumidifiers sung their dry song, and condensers wept into cisterns bricked by hand. The waters of the living mines, once desecrated, now revered again, were tested, filtered, honored. The creed was not sharpened like a spear. It was folded like bread. Those who kept helms on kept them. Those who lifted theirs did so with care. Never as insult, always as trust offered. Trust is the rarest spice. It seasons the hardest meat. They found seeds hidden in vaults cracked by the night, hardy strains from Concord Dawn and Kalevala. Desert beans, bred to laugh at drought, vine cuttings from greenhouses once curated by pacifists, long mocked as weak. In Keldeb's shadowed courtyards, survivors planted in rows that did not march but danced around broken stone, children in scaled-down cuirasses, watered fledgling shoots from dented canteens. Elders told them that patience is also a weapon, that roots conquer by persistence, not by charge. The first sprigs of behot and bitter Tingilar peppers winked up at armored faces, and even the most hard-faced warrior softened at the promise of uji cake baked with homegrown fruit again. Reconstruction required maps of two kinds, of rock and of hearts. Scouts in refurbished gauntlets mapped habitable sectors. marked pockets where radiation still clung like a grudge, and charted new airflows through collapsed arteries of the city. Meanwhile, old quarrels were mapped in council, grids of grievance, columns of compromise. Not all rows balanced. Some sums demanded time. The armorer and Bo-Katan presided like twin poles of a compass, creed and crown, measuring each proposal against the only question that mattered. Does it make the children safer? When disputes sharpened, Din Djarin would simply lift a gloved hand and say, "There will be work enough for all." It is hard to argue with a sentence that sounds like breakfast. Foundlings were named with ceremony that felt both new and primordial. In the glow of the forge, the phrase, "Ni Kirtail Gai Sad," "I know your name as my child," was spoken in voices roughened by smoke and history. A boy from Ariadu took the sigil of a hammered star. A girl from Ord Mantell chose a stylized mythosaur head that made her stand straighter. A tiny one from nowhere, once chased in alleys, now stood upon a low stool, while the armorer measured a vambrace small as a bracer. Grogu, little hand lifted, cooed solemnly when plates met leather. The forge did not laugh, but it glowed a fraction warmer. They rebuilt rituals along with roofs. At dusk, helmets faced west, and Eye-Han was kept. Names spoken not to reopen wounds, but to keep memory fed. At dawn, Meshkaroya returned to dust fields cleared of shrapnel, the ball arcing between jetpack-assisted leaps, grace and bravado shaking hands. In taut afternoons, children played kubikad upon boards carved from broken bulkheads, knives tapping squares in a music that taught calculation and restraint. And always the language, Mandoar, flowed like a river of plain words with sharp banks, efficient, flexible, sparing in flattery, lavish in insults reserved for cowards. Hear it, and you hear a people who waste nothing, not metal, not syllables, not pain. On the surface above, teams harvested Beskar from ruins the Empire thought mute. They pried plates from collapsed walkers, peeled armor from the carcasses of old lies, and carried the metal down like relics. The armorer smelted these grief metals with ore from fresh veins discovered by geologists who had once been smugglers, because smuggling teaches the land's secret doors. Into that molten lake they let fall a pinch of ash from the night and a pinch of soil from the new gardens, fusing sorrow and seed into the alloy. So it remembers both, she said. Not all days were flame-lit and noble. Some were petty as dust. Two clans argued over a parcel of chambers whose vault had once held family heirlooms now gone. A pilot, proud of the wine of his newly tuned pack, struck a pillar and knocked a week of masonry astray. A child lied, another stole, a third threw a punch too quickly and learned that apology is heavier than any gauntlet. But the creed proved durable enough to hold smallness as well as greatness. A code that cannot contain error is only vanity dressed as virtue. Word spread through the outer rim. Mandalore was not dead. Traders brought wire, clean cloth, filtration membranes, and gossip. Former enemies arrived bearing crates instead of blasters. Carasynthia Dune's rumor of sympathy in distant offices. A quiet grant from a planet once rival. A shipment of glass panes from artisans who remembered Sundari's glitter and wished to give back without unveiling their names. Boba Fett, having carved a different rule in Mos Espa, sent a sealed case with a simple note. For the little ones, size them well.
Inside lay bundles of padding, supple and strong. Bo-Katan nodded once, the minimal courtesy owed an old complication, and had the tailors get to work. One evening, as the forge's breath slowed and the sky beyond the vents bruised toward purple, the clans gathered in the Hall of Echoes, a place now roofless, columns like ribs, the stars visible as if the dome had become a lens. Bo-Katan spoke first, not as ruler untouchable, but as steward accountable. She reviewed progress in plain terms. Habitable wards increased, water tables rising, schools begun in 3 districts, food reserves the size of a fist and growing. She did not promise an easy harvest, she promised a harvest. Then the armorer spoke short and clear. We are alive because we behaved as if we would be. The hall murmured agreement. A final task remained, to settle the question of sovereignty without inviting the old curse of the blade. With the Darksaber gone, many felt unburdened, and yet uncertainty can be as dangerous as any relic. They drafted a charter not of throne but of forge, a compact of clans pledging to contribute fighters, farmers, smiths, teachers in rotating measure, a council that changes seats like dice, never letting dust claim one cushion, a clause hard as Beskar that the foundlings are priority over pride. When signatures were made, carved, burned, stamped, sworn, the hall did not cheer, it exhaled. In quiet corners, grief's long echo still visited. Paz Vizsla's name was carved deeper into a pillar, already smooth from the tracing of hands. Betrayal Kryze's memory was told in a voice that did not waver, as Bo-Katan allowed gentleness to sit beside steel without apology. Paz's son, Ragnar, stood watch on a gantry and did not feel small. Grogu watched moths chase torchlight and lifted them with a thought, then set them down again, giggling as if to demonstrate a new law of the world, that light can be moved without being broken. The first true night of safety arrived without ceremony. No alarm, no distant thump of bombardment, only the scrape of ladles in pots of Taingala, the clink of cups, the soft hiss of armor unclasped by the few who chose to unclasp. Over comms, patrol captains reported nothing worth reporting. The armorer banked the forge as one banks a child's cradle, and looked pleased in the secret way of artisans, by finding in the day a mistake to fix tomorrow. Din Djarin sat with Bo-Katan on a stoop overlooking a courtyard where seedlings wore dew like medals. They said little. There are victories that grow stronger when not touched by too many words. Do not imagine, young one, that danger has retired. Ruin remembers the board and returns to entertain them. Pirates will test the lanes. Governors will covet the ore. Old ideologues will rattle old chains and call the noise tradition. But Mandalore has learned a discipline greater than ferocity. Maintenance, the daily, unglamorous defense of a future. Armor requires constant oiling. So do alliances. Foundations crack, so do certainties. The way is not a road to be arrived upon, but a verb to be conjugated each morning. I keep. We keep. Sleep now beneath the new roofs of stone and promise. Hear the forge hum like a giant's cat. Smell the sweetness of ooge cooling on racks, beside racks of cooling plates. Somewhere, a mother adjusts a child's gorget and whispers the creed not as law, but as lullaby. Somewhere, A father, weary and stunned by the absence of danger, watches the eastern sky for the first hint of pale, and realizes it is not fire, but dawn. Linger. And somewhere, in a chamber where plans are stored like seeds, a map of Mandalore grows greener by the week. Hush, little flame. The reforging is not finished. It never is. But tonight the hammers rest not from defeat, but from enough. Tomorrow they will sing again, and their music will sound, if you listen closely, like home. Chapter 12. This is the way. Come closer, little ember. Let the hush of the forge fold around you, like a cloak freshly warmed. Tonight, we do not chase banners through the dust, nor count the sparks of clashing blades. Tonight, we listen to the thing that outlives victories and survives defeats, the slow, patient drum that has guided warriors and widows, rulers and foundlings alike. We listen to the way, the work that begins after triumph, the courage that breathes after crying. This is the end that is a beginning, the circle traced in soot and light, the eternal way. First, hear the old vow spoken as gently as a mother's hand. The resolnare, the 6 actions, do not bark orders, they rock the cradle. Wear your armor, child, not to hide, but to belong. Speak Mandoar, the language that wastes no breath on ornaments. When a blade is needed, and offers 10 honest insults for every one false praise. Defend yourself and your kin, and let your defense be quick, not cruel. Contribute to your clan, coin or harvest or hammer strike, for debt is a rust that eats both borrower and lender. When the Mandalore calls, rally, for a people dispersed is only wind, but a people gathered is a storm that chooses where to reign. And raise your children in the way, whether born to you by blood or by mercy, for a warrior is not a metal to be mined, but a tree to be tended. Now listen to the armor on its rack, breathing in the warmth of the room. Beskar is not proud. It is practical. It remembers ash and remembers rain. It keeps the dent that taught a lesson and the shine that honors a promise. In it, the hammer's grammar has only a few verbs: heat, fold, strike, quench. But from those sparing words, an entire culture is spoken. We have forged plates from scavenged lies and salted them with a pinch of garden soil, so that every cuirass carries famine and feast in equal measure. Put it on, and you hear the old songs trapped between layers, humming in time with your own breath. Put it on, and you are never alone. You have heard many tales of our struggles with the Jedi, little Ember, and perhaps wondered if the light and the iron must always quarrel. Know this, the Jedi's wind and the Mandalorian mountain have tested one another for ages, and from that testing, both remembered their shapes. There were days of bitter ruin, nights when the sky was a saber and the ground a shield. There were duels whose names will outlast us all, yet in quieter hours, warrior bowed to warrior, not to surrender, but to recognize the skill that keeps a fight honest. Against the force we set our will, against speed our craft, against arrogance our discipline. If we prevailed, it was by preparation. If we fell, it was with blades clean. Respect your worthy foes, child. They make your guard precise. Consider adoption, the softest spear point, the one that pierces despair. When a child cries in the dark and a gauntlet reaches down, The way grows one warrior wider. The creed does not measure bloodlines, it measures willingness. So Din Djarin, foundling of fire and flight, learned to hold the creed like a lantern in a cave, and the small one called Grogu learned that a hand can lift stone or lift sorrow, and both require control. The day a name is given, Nikirtael Gaisad, a soul is welded to a people, and the seam, if minded, is stronger than the plate. Remember the figures whose shadows stretched across our path. Jango Fett, who answered a galaxy's contempt with competence, building a reputation plate by plate until empires wore his face. Boba Fett, who crawled from a monster's stomach and found that surviving is also a kind of mastery, then ruled a throne not with fear's froth, but with a stillness that redirected the tide. Bo-Katan Kryze, who learned the cost of banners and then chose stewardship over spectacle, leading not from a blade's glow, but from a forge's heat when the Darksaber shattered. Do you see? The symbol broke and the people did not. A culture that once chained itself to a weapon learned to tie itself to work. Because the way is not merely rule or war, it is maintenance. It is markets rebuilt beneath cracked arches where spice brews and children haggle and grandmothers weigh cloth by pinch and patience. It is Meshgaroya played on a field pried from rubble, laughter vaulting higher than jetpacks dare. It is the evening Aihan, the bittersweet naming of the dead, while stew thickens and the living warm their hands. It is seed set in a stubborn soil, and the stubborn waiting for shoots that do not hurry. It is apology spoken without audience, and armor mended without complaint. This is a warfare slower than blasters and sharper than sabers, the warfare of refusing to vanish. Scatter does not weaken a people who know how to call and answer. In the outer rim, in city slums and dust moons, our language kept its edge. Mandoa traveled light, slipped through checkpoints in jokes and recipes, nested in lullabies whose rhymes fit under helmets. Foundlings memorized verbs while learning to field strip a carbine. Elders corrected grammar as they corrected stance. Words were stored like ammunition, drawn only when aim was steady. And in the coverts, the Resolnere was taught not as a wall, but as a door. Enter, and you add your voice to the choir. Leave, and it keeps singing, waiting for your harmony to return. There was a prophecy once, a dim and dangerous thing, that foretold our final dwindling. One broken man in a broken suit, slain by a light we could not answer. Prophecies are maps traced by trembling hands. They showed true valleys and false cliffs alike. We answered not with argument, but with presence. We endured the night that wanted to make our memories sterile. We smuggled names through fire. We reopened the great forge and fed it with the careful coal of cooperation. We watched the counterfeit crown, the saber of shadow, crumble, and we did not shiver. See how small the end seems, beside a people that refuses to end. What then is left when thrones are quiet and the anvils ring on time? The way, the daily way. A council that rotates like crops, so no field grows sick with the same root. A pledge that foundlings come first, that none eats alone, that armor is for service more than swagger. A treaty with the past, keep the dents that taught you.
file down the burrs that cut others. A posture toward the future, helm forward, chin level, hand open until it must close. Linger. Above all, a hospitality for those who will join tomorrow as we once joined. Take what is heavy with us, it will be less heavy. Hear now the closing benediction, little ember, in the tongue that wastes nothing. Boronar, Darasum Kote, honor everlasting. Not the thin honor of flags flapped for coin, but the thick honor of promises kept when nobody watches. Mi solus tome, mi solus dar tome, mi mehe dinui an, mi bajuri verde. We are one when together, we are one when parted. We share all, we raise warriors. Say it softly if you must. Mumbling is still music when the notes are true. And now, breathe. The forge hums. The gardens exhale the green breath of new things. Somewhere a child is being measured for a first gorget, fidgeting with pride. Somewhere an elder slides a finished plate across the bench with a sigh that means enough for today. Din watches the horizon with Grogu in his arms. Bo-Katan studies a map that grows greener by the week. In a desert city far away, Boba tips a cup to those who learn to rule themselves. The night is not empty. It is full and desires only that you rest while it keeps watch. Sleep, little ember. Armor on its peg, promises in their sheath, language under the tongue like a last sweet. When you wake, the way will still be here. Asking nothing you cannot give, and giving more than you can ask. For empires fade and banners rot, but the eternal way. Hammer and hearth, oath and adoption, courage and care, goes on, steady as Beskar under burning rain. This is the way.